Hey Avenue Youth, Pastor Wyatt here. We are so excited and so happy to have you guys back with us for week 2 of our series, Peace in the Middle. We hope that you guys are having an amazing night. We are so excited to have you guys here. Quick recap in case you guys missed last week's message. We talked about the basics of peace and where we can find peace. And we focused in on 3 main points. The first one being peace in God's promises, that we can go to God's word, we can go to the Bible and find promises that God has for us in these times. We can find peace in God's promises. We can also find peace in prayer. Prayer is just a fancy word or a spiritual word for communication. Prayer is us communicating and talking to God about our problems, talking to God about what we're going through. And we can go to God with those situations, with those struggles, and we can find peace in the middle of those issues because we are praying to God. We are praying that God would take control of the situation. We are taking it out of our hands and putting it into God's hands. So we find peace in prayer. The next thing we find peace in is peace in perspective. Whatever you're looking at, whatever you're focused on, that's the direction that you're going to go. If you're focused on negativity, if you're focused on the news, if you're focused on all the things surrounding us, that is where our thoughts are going to go. That is where our emotions are going to go. That's where our direction for our life is going to go. But if we focus and change our perspective to Jesus, that's where our thoughts are going to go. That's where our emotions are going to go. That's the direction that our life is going to go. So we can find peace in God's promises, in prayer, and perspective. So that was last week. And this week, we're going to be jumping into one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible. And it can be found in 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings chapter 19. Maybe you're familiar with this story already, but we're going to be jumping in, starting off in verse 1 all the way to verse 13. Okay, so 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 13. I'm reading out of the NLT tonight, and so if you guys have a translation similar to it, you'll be able to follow along quite easily, or if you guys have you guys' phones open, or a computer available, look up 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 13. That's going to be the main passage of scripture that we're going to be jumping into. So, if you're ready, here we go. Verse 1 says this: When Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah: May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. And then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died." Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, "Get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. There he came to a cave where he spent the night. But the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah replied, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down their altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left. Now they are trying to kill me too. Go and stand before me on the mountain," the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, and the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Have you ever been afraid of the dark? I think the real question is, are you still afraid of the dark? Now, if you answered yes, don't worry, it is totally natural. And I think the reason why we are naturally afraid of the dark is because we don't know. It's the unknown. We don't know what's out there. There's times where even I'll wake up in the middle of the night wanting a drink of water, and I'll look down my hall and see pitch blackness and rethink to myself, you know what? I could probably wait until the morning because I don't want to step out into it. I don't know what's there. Ordinary things become scary. Noises are louder. The dark is just a naturally scary place to be in. And in this story, in 1 Kings 19, we find our main character, Elijah, in the dark. What happens in this story has to be explained in chapter 18, the chapter right before this one. Elijah has this amazing moment on top of Mount Carmel, an amazing moment where God comes through. He defeats these other prophets, the prophets of Baal, who were taking over Israel at the time. People were being killed if you didn't convert to Baal. It was a whole situation that was happening. And Elijah challenges these prophets, wins because of God, and because of that, he has an amazing victory. And now we find ourselves in chapter 19, where Elijah is coming down from the mountain after this amazing victory, and he receives a message from a woman named Jezebel. Now, Jezebel was the wife of the king at the time, King Ahab. And she sends a messenger to basically tell Elijah, look, I know what you did to my prophets. I know what you did to these people. Guess what? I'm coming after you next. She even says, God, kill me. I pray that God kills me, strikes me down, if I do not do the same thing that you did to those prophets. And what happens to Elijah? He becomes afraid. He begins to have fear. Elijah needs peace. And it's from the fear that he has that he begins to run. He runs towards a mountain called Mount Sinai. And as he gets there, he finds a cave. And he goes into the cave. And that seems to be his resting place towards the end of this story. Now, caves are scary. Caves are dark places. You don't know what's in them. You don't know which creatures are in them. It's a natural, scary place to be in. The thing about a cave is that noises are louder in a cave. Things are scarier within the dark, just like what we said. You almost feel like you're trapped. And I believe that for a lot of us, including myself, including you, we can feel like that right now. In these moments of uncertainty, in these moments of we don't know what's coming next, we don't really know what's in front of us, we can almost feel as though we are in the dark. And we can feel a lot of times like we're Elijah in this story, where we have encounters with God. We have moments with God as we're reading through the Bible, as we're praying to him, as there's breakthrough happening inside of our lives. But then within a moment, everything can change. Fear can come into our hearts, and then we flee. And then we find ourselves in a dark place. Can I just tell you, just to be totally honest with you, right now, if you are in that dark place, hey, it is totally natural. It is totally okay. There have been times where I find myself in a dark place. There are times where other people watching have found themselves in dark places, whether emotionally, whether spiritually, whether mentally. We have all been in dark places before. And I think right now, in the midst of this quarantine, in the midst of the uncertainty that's happening in the world, that's happening in the news, it is so easy for us to find ourselves in a dark place, to almost feel as though we're in a cave, to almost feel as though we are trapped by what's happening. The noises are louder while we're in this situation. Things are happening that we don't really understand. Uncertainty is looming, and we can naturally feel scared because of the situation. Can I just tell you first and foremost, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to have these emotions. It's okay to have these sort of feelings. It is totally 100% natural. And the reality is that in the midst of our cave, in the midst of the darkness, we need peace now more than ever. We need stillness. We need to be calm now more than ever. And it's so difficult to find those things while we are in the dark. But I have hope for you from God's word that we can find peace in the dark. That's the message title for tonight, is peace in the dark. Even in the midst of your situation, even in the midst of your cave, we can find peace in the dark. And I believe that because of this story, we can find two very simple, very clear truths that will put peace inside of our lives, that will put peace inside of our situation. In the midst of our cave, in the midst of what we're facing, we can still find peace in the middle of it all. Because guess what? Elijah was still human. Elijah was a prophet. He was a messenger of God. God spoke directly to Elijah. And a lot of times we see Elijah as almost like a superhero. We see certain characters in the Bible almost as superheroes, like they are subhuman. They are beyond what we feel. They are beyond what we think. They are better than us. They are different than us. But that's just not the case. Elijah was a human being just like you and just like me. He had emotions. He had feelings. He had pain that he went through, and he still was afraid even in the midst of this moment. So I want to give us just two very simple truths that we can hold on to and that we can remember in these moments and in these times. The very first truth is this: God is with you. God is with you. In your cave, God is with you. Because guess what? Before Elijah was in the cave, God was with him. While Elijah was on Mount Carmel, while he was defeating the prophets of Baal, God was with him. Even before those moments, God was with him. And guess what? God was with Elijah in the midst of his cave. And even as Elijah steps out of his cave, in later verses, God is still with him. You see, for us, I think a lot of times what happens is that while we are in the midst of our cave, while we're in the midst of our situation, we can feel as though God is standing on the outside of our cave, almost like this. You can't see him, but he's just standing outside of our cave. And he's just saying, hey, I'm here if you need anything. I'm just going to be right outside of here. Whenever you're ready, come on out. Hey, I'm here if you need anything. But that's not the case, because God does not wait for us to step out of our cave to be with us. He doesn't wait for us outside of our situation for us to be done with it in order for him to be with us. No, the reality is that even in the midst of our cave, even in the midst of our struggle, even in the midst of our worst situations, God is still with us. God is with you. God is with you right now. Even as you're watching this message in the comfort of your home, God is with you. Right now, I'm at the church. I'm in our youth room as I'm doing this message. And God is with me right now. But guess what? You don't have to be in church. You don't have to be here at Avenue. You don't have to be surrounded by other Christians, by other believers in order for God to be with you, because God is with you despite of your situation, despite of what you're going through, despite of who you are. God is still with you. Can I just tell you really quick that God is not afraid of your cave. He's not afraid of your struggle. He's not afraid of what you're going through. He's not afraid of your feelings. You see, because God was still with Elijah, even though he was afraid, even though of what he was going through, even though he might have had somebody after him ready to kill him, God was still with him. God was not afraid of what was happening, of what was going on. God was still with Elijah. And guess what? Your fear does not stop God from being with you. Your fear does not stop yourself from having an encounter with God. It doesn't matter. In fact, I believe that it is our fear that brings God closer to us. Because ultimately, we need God in those moments. We need God so much more in those moments. We always need God, but I feel like that we search more for God in the midst of our fear, in the midst of what we're going through. So I just want to remind you and just reassure you and tell you that right now, if you're afraid, if you need peace, if you're struggling with something beyond what all of us are going through right now, if you need that, can I just tell you really quick that God is with you. He's with you in the midst of whatever you're going through. He's with you in the midst of this quarantine. He's with you right now. In fact, I love this verse that we can find in the book of Joshua. It's in Joshua 1, verse 9. You see, Joshua was a leader in the Bible who was with Moses. He was following Moses. Moses was like his mentor. And Moses dies. And Joshua is the next leader of Israel. He's the one that's going to take them into the promised land. And this is what God is telling Joshua within this moment. It can be found in Joshua 1, verse 9, which says this: "This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." I could preach just off of that. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged. Can I just tell you really quick that the way that the enemy is going to get you off of your game, the way that the devil is going to attack you, is that he's either going to try to make you afraid or he's going to try to make you discouraged. Those are the two biggest weapons that the enemy is going to try to use against you. He's either going to try to place fear inside of your life or he's going to try to discourage you. Because here's the thing, is that if he can make you afraid, you're not going to follow after God's purpose because you're afraid. And if he can discourage you, he's going to discourage you in the midst of your purpose so that you can go back or that you don't keep on moving forward in God's plan. So the two weapons that the enemy wants to use is fear and discouragement. Have you felt fear within these last couple of days? Have you felt discouraged within these last couple of days? Because I feel like that you just have to know that even though you might be afraid, even though you might be discouraged, take heart, be strong and courageous, because our God is strong and courageous. Our God is victorious. Our God is able. And guess what? Our God is with you. In fact, I love what the end of verse 9 says. He says, "For your God." Your God. It's not just my God. It's not just somebody else's God. It is your God, which means that God is a personal God. He's in the midst of everything that you do. And so even while you're in this cave, even while you're going through the struggle, even while you're in the dark, can I just tell you really quick that your fear, your darkness, your cave, your struggle does not stop God. What you're going through right now does not stop God, because he is with you even in the midst. Even in the midst of your darkness, God is with you. He's with you through it all. Even in the midst of the struggle and of the situation that you're going through right now, God is with you. But we can find peace in our darkness. We can find peace in the dark, knowing that God is with us. The next thing and the final thing that we can realize about this and about this story is that God is for you. God is for you. In the midst of your cave, in the midst of your darkness, in the midst of your struggle, God is still for you. Your struggle did not stop God from being for you. Your struggle has not stopped God from loving you. Your struggle and what we're all going through has not stopped God's purpose over your life. Okay, just because your school might be canceled, just because the field trips that you were going to be going on might be canceled, just because Avenue Youth Services in person might be canceled, just because all of these things might be canceled, does not mean that your calling has been canceled. Okay, because the reality is that God is still for you. Even in the midst of what you're going through. The reality is that before Elijah got into his cave, God was for him. He was for him on Mount Carmel. He was for him in the midst of that miracle happening. In the midst of fire coming down from heaven, God was for him. And even after Elijah comes out of the cave, God is still for him. And guess what? In the midst of his cave, in the midst of the darkness, God was still for Elijah. The darkness did not stop God. His feelings, his fear did not stop God. His situation, the cave, did not stop God. Again, God was not standing outside of the cave saying, hey, whenever you're ready to come back out, whenever you're ready, whenever you're over yourself, whenever you're done crying, whenever you're done with your fear, with being afraid, hey, I'm going to be right outside of here. No, God was with him, but God was also for him. God is for you. He's for you. Just because you're afraid doesn't mean that God has stopped being for you. Just because even sometimes we lose trust in God, just because sometimes we can be far away from God because we can draw away and walk away from God, does not stop God from being for us. Can I just tell you that God still loves you? He still loves you. His love has not separated himself from you in the midst of this situation. In fact, we even see that in Romans chapter 8, where it says, what could possibly separate us from God's love? Neither death nor life. It even says to not even the worries about today or the fears of tomorrow. Not even our fear, not even our worry, not even the feelings or the emotions that we have can possibly separate us from the love of God. God is for you. He is for you in the midst of what you're going through. You are not alone in this. Not only are we going through this with you, not only are we for you, not only are we with you, but guess what? There's a bigger calling than just us, and that's God. God is with you. He is for you. He is for you in the midst of what you're going through. In fact, we see that within Romans 8. Romans 8, verse 31, very popular verse within the Bible. Romans 8, verse 31, which says this. It says, what shall we say about such wonderful things as these? If God is for us, who can ever be against us? If God is for us, who could ever be against us? Guess what? I know in these moments it's easy to get scared. I know in these moments it's easy to be discouraged. But in hindsight, when we look back on this situation, we're going to laugh. We're going to think to ourselves, why were we so worried? Why were we so afraid when God had it all under control? When God was still for me in the midst of that. When God was still with me in the midst of what I was going through. In the midst of my uncertainty. In the midst of the darkness, God was still with me. And God was still for me. God has not forgotten about you. God has not left you hanging. You are not alone in what you're going through. Not only am I here for you, other leaders of Avenue, other students of Avenue, but more importantly, God is with you. And God is for you. He is the answer and the solution to everything that we face, to everything that we're looking for. If you need peace right now, if you need joy right now, I pray that over your life and that God would supply it abundantly. That he would give you more than you possibly need, that your cup and that your life would overflow with peace, even in the midst of uncertainty, even in the midst of scary times, even in the midst of fear. Because the reality is, if one person would know about darkness the most, it would be Jesus. See, Jesus is God's son. And he was sent to earth in a human body, 100% human, 100% God. He felt pain. He went through what we went through. But Jesus, from the very beginning of his life, was actually born into darkness. As we read throughout the Christmas story and we read about how Jesus was born, we always picture him in a stable with the stars overhead, with nice animals all around. Everything's clean, everything's nice. But I don't believe that that's how the story actually looked. In fact, if you look up on historical research on this story, you will actually begin to realize that more than likely, Jesus was born in a cave. You see, when farmers, when shepherds, when people who would have stables, when they would make them, they would actually put them inside of a cave because it would be sort of like a natural barrier, a sort of natural protective shield from the elements, from rain, and they could also save money on supplies and from wood to build a roof, all those types of things. Not a deep cave, but it was still within a side of a mountain. And Jesus was born in a stable, in a manger, the most unlikely situation Jesus was born into. Jesus was born in a cave. He was born in a scary situation. He was born in darkness. But isn't it so crazy that Jesus is also characterized as the light of the world? That he is the way, that he is the truth, that he is the life, that ultimately Jesus, the Son of God, was born into darkness to save you and me. He was born in darkness, sent down from heaven to save you and to save me. Can I just tell you that you are not alone in what you're going through? You have a light with you. You have Jesus with you. You have a light lighting your feet, lighting your path, showing you the way, marking your steps. You have all that you need. You have Jesus. He's with you in the midst of what you're going through. He's for you in the midst of what you're going through. Jesus knows exactly what you're going through, and guess what? Jesus is the answer for what you're going through. He was born in a cave. He was born in the darkness, but yet through the darkness came light. Through the darkness came hope. Through the darkness came peace. And I pray that you would also find peace, that you would find hope, that you would find joy in the midst of what you're going through. My challenge for you this week is continue to be in your word. Use this time of quarantine. Use this time of being with your families, of being at home. Use it wisely. Don't just use it with sleeping in all day, eating junk food, all those types of things. I would say this: spend time with your family, go outside, work out, go for a walk, go for a run, go and skateboard, go and bike ride, play basketball, play soccer, go and be active. But more importantly than that, be active in your spiritual walk. Can I just let you know that I believe that these times of quarantine and these times of isolation and these times of staying at home, I know this is a moment for us to come closer to God. This is a moment for us to be closer and for us to grow in our word, to grow closer in the knowledge of who God is, to grow closer to him through prayer, through community, and through his word. God is with you. He is for you. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go.